Good Monday morning to you. It is time for our weekly financial segment from the Renaissance Companies. And joining us in studio, as he does each Monday morning, is Paul Harmon. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Charlie. How you doing?
I'm great. We have some special guests joining us this morning as well.
Yeah, we have Cheryl DiNardo, a real estate expert, and Steve White joining me as well. And one of the things we're going to be talking about today is really a couple things. Number one is the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, which basically means free money for people.
Ah, I like that.
Yeah. Free money is always nice, especially when you don't have to pay it back.
That's right.
There's been a buzz going around, for the last year or so about the $7,500 credit that people are getting for first-time home buyers. This is a little different. The difference between the $7,500 home credit people were getting before is they'd have to pay that back over a period of years. In this particular case, it's free. But there's a catch. There's a deadline. You have to December 1 to be able to use this money. So this is sort of like a call to action interview, if you will, trying to get people that you need to move now. And then the other thing that we want to talk about, which is why I've asked our guest to join us today, is to talk about some of the foreclosures that we've seen in bank-owned properties. Because aside from all the doom and gloom that we've been hearing on the media, let me tell you, the opportunities are just absolutely tremendous.
There's substantial inventory of distressed properties out there, and the bank-owned properties are listed at or below market value. So there's a lot of opportunity. The banks don't want to manage properties. They want to work with the motivated buyers.
Do you go to a bank or do you stick to going to a realtor if you're looking at some of these properties?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because on that, I'm going to do a little shameless self-promotion here. We are actually running a seminar on Thursday, April 9th at Southern New Hampshire University. Mm-hmm. We are going to be having a seminar geared to show people how to go approach buying a bank-owned property.
Oh, great.
Because it's not quite as simple as you think. First of all, I think as Steve mentioned, you can buy them at like pennies on the dollar. We're talking about the way these things are priced right now is like 50 to 60 cents on the dollar.
That's right.
All right. That's number one. Number two, I think it's advisable to get someone who is an REO expert. And I'll let these folks explain what an REO expert or specialist is compared to a traditional agent, because there's a lot of moving parts to that process. So although it's exciting and there's a lot of opportunities, one can easily get burned if they're not careful.
What is an REO?
REO stands for real estate owned property, also known as bank owned property. This REO specialist is familiar with the bank-owned buying process and also familiar with the local market.
What we do is we negotiate the contracts, we know the concessions and the timelines, and we're skilled to close the deal. And we want to make sure that we keep the buyer in the driver's seat and in a position of strength.
Let me jump in, and if I may, one of the earlier conversations I had with both Cheryl and Steve, it's a lot different. One of the dangers, and I'm going to run a big risk here. I'm going to go out on a limb here because everyone has got a cousin or Uncle Harry who's in the business.
Exactly.
All right. And, here's what you have to ask yourself the question. Is if you're going to be going into an area that really should be handled by a specialist, and we should probably explore that in a second here. Do you want to deal with someone who is just in the business part-time or someone who is, let's say, a top producer? And by the way, what does top producer mean? That means they're a good salesperson. That means they're good at convincing people to do things. I don't know if I want someone selling me. I'm the one who's buying, but on the same token, I would prefer to be in the driver's seat. So the advantage of dealing with someone who's a specialist is what these guys were just talking about was navigating the process. One of the things that a lot of folks don't recognize that they pointed out to me is that unlike the traditional purchase, that a bank's completely off the hook with any disclosure as far as the property is concerned. Typically, Charlie, I don't know if you when you've bought a home, have you ever seen like the seller disclosure and they talk about the condition
Seen
of the
it,
property?
never read it.
Okay, so all right, you're like the typical buyer.
Exactly. Just sign.
But at least you have something there describing something about the property, the condition of the property, et cetera. Banks are completely off the hook. And the reason why is because they finance the property. They don't know anything about it. So it's almost like buyer beware. So when they're talking about all the intricacies of walking you through this process, it's not a traditional, let's just kind of walk through the property, do a few home inspections. Mm-hmm. Steve, what is it you mentioned to me about the winterization?
All right, these banks want to sell these properties as is, and as Paul said, what they say right on the seller's disclosure is that the seller makes no representations because they've never occupied the property. Now, don't be worried by this. A buyer is still entitled to have all the inspections that they need to have. The thing is, a lot of times these properties are winterized, the power has been shut off, and who do you think pays to have these things turned back on?
us, the buyer.
That's right. And they need to know that up front because they're already working on a budget. They're working with a lender that's saying how much they need to put down, how much they're going to need to bring to the closing table. There's a lot of things to take into consideration.
And more importantly, you have to know what inspections to actually have done. So one of the terms that we tend to throw around loosely amongst each other is we need to do our due diligence. Well, what does that mean? It just simply means you need to do your research.
But how much time does the bank allow you to do your due diligence?
That's negotiated. You have to put it in the contract.
Yeah, that's more about the buyer and the seller and what's in the contract. Once you have your inspections done, then you move forward with the financing.
I see.
And what happens if you don't meet those? Cheryl, you were telling me about that the other day. That actually brings up a really good point. What happens if once you negotiated the time and then you're not able to fulfill that time?
Well, deadlines are very important. That's another reason why you want to work with an REO specialist who is just ready to take on any negotiating that needs to be done in an aggressive manner and just move the process. And there's a lot of things that can come up that maybe a top producing agent that's not familiar with bank-owned properties may not know how to handle in a simplified manner.
Well, there could also be a bull in a china closet and kind of tick off the bank if you ask me.
You have to know what the consumer expects. You also have to know what the bank expects.
Well, they have per diems, too.
Exactly.
Right?
That's
Why
right.
don't you talk about those a little bit?
If you don't close on time, the clock is ticking.
Yeah, and it could be $100 a day.
Sure.
For the buyer to pay. And that doesn't matter whose fault it is. If it's the bank's fault, if it's the realtor's fault of not closing, the title company, it doesn't matter.
So we can have a blame fest all day long. It's not going to help anybody.
How do people get more information on this seminar on April 9th? That's Thursday, April 9th at Southern New Hampshire University.
There's one of two ways, Charlie. Either one, they can call us at 1-800-459-6327. They can contact Cheryl directly at 845-2219. Or they can register online, and registration is highly recommended, and actually it's going to be required at www.rencompanies.com. That's www.rencompanies.com.
All right, and that's Thursday, April 9th at Southern New Hampshire University. That is our Renaissance Companies segment for this week. Paul Harmon, Cheryl DiNardo, and Steve White, appreciate you all coming in this morning.
Thank you very much.
Charlie.